Before the police ever stepped foot inside Highridge Estate, something else had already claimed the darkness. A shattered lantern, a whisper no one could explain, and a young historian who insisted the relic he found was calling his name. Tonight, we uncover the first secret buried beneath the estate's polished floors, and the truth begins with a simple knock at the door. Every legend begins with a whisper, but this one started with a scream that no one else claimed to hear. The night the messenger arrived, the city was drowning in a cold November fog. Lamps along Blackthorn Street flickered dimly, their glow swallowed by the mist as though the darkness itself was hungry. Inside my flat above the apothecary, the quiet was so complete that even the scratch of my pen felt intrusive. I had resigned myself to a long evening of paperwork until the door knocker thundered through the silence like a hammer on a coffin lid. Few people visited at such an hour, and fewer still came bearing urgency. When I opened the door, a man collapsed against the frame, drenched from rain, trembling as though chased by nightmares. "Please," he gasped, his voice frayed at the edges. "You're the investigator, the one who deals with unusual cases." Unusual. People always used that word when what they really meant was impossible. I helped him inside. His clothes were soaked, clinging to him like a second skin. Mud streaked his boots and sleeves, and his breath trembled like he'd run the whole way from another world. "My name is Edwin Harrow," he managed. "I work for Professor Alden Mycroft, the archaeologist." The name alone warned me trouble had arrived. Mycroft was infamous for his expeditions into remote regions and his tendency to return with relics wrapped in controversy. "What happened?" I asked. Edwin swallowed hard and lowered his voice. "The professor is dead. And his body, it wasn't natural." A familiar tightening coiled in my stomach. "Speak clearly." "He was found in his study. No wounds, no sign of struggle, no sign of intruders. But in his hand, clenched so tightly we couldn't pry it loose, was a spearhead carved from obsidian, black as night, the same relic he brought back from his last expedition." A cold ripple crawled up my spine. "And you believe the relic had something to do with it?" Edwin leaned forward, eyes glistening with fear. "Professor Mycroft claimed it was cursed. He said he felt watched, haunted. He said the relic wanted to be returned. Superstition. Legends. Old tribal warnings. I had heard such things before, but they rarely amounted to more than tales woven by frightened travelers." Still, Edwin was shaking. Not theatrical fear, real fear, the kind that roots itself in bone. "There's more," he whispered. "Someone was in the house last night, a figure in the hallway, tall, hooded. When I followed, it vanished. And now the servants refuse to sleep." Outside, thunder growled like an animal waking. I exhaled slowly. "You want me to investigate the death?" He nodded. "Before someone else meets the same fate." I studied him for a long moment. Rain drummed against the window. The relic, the sudden death, the mysterious intruder, threads of a web I hadn't yet seen clearly, but one I suspected was large. "Very well," I said. "We leave at dawn." As Edwin allowed himself a breath of relief, I glanced at the window, the mist outside swirling strangely, almost as though something moved within it. I told myself it was a trick of the rain, but a whisper in the back of my mind suggested otherwise. Some houses creak with age. Others creak because something inside is trying to get out. Dawn arrived reluctantly, dragging a gray sky behind it. The world outside was slick with rain and weighed down with fog as Edwin Harrow and I boarded the carriage to Highridge Estate, the late Professor Mycroft's manor. The smell of wet earth drifted in through the windows as horses clopped through puddles. Edwin said little during the trip, and I didn't press him. Fear makes people repeat themselves, and I needed facts, not panic. Yet the way he kept glancing out the window suggested his thoughts were circling the same memory, the hooded figure he had seen in the hallway. By midday, we approached Highridge Estate. The manor stood atop a hill, its stone walls darkened by age, ivy gripping its sides like skeletal fingers. At first glance it looked abandoned, yet a strange feeling prickled at my neck, as though the house was watchful. Inside, a thin, aging butler named Merrick greeted us, though greeted might have been too generous a word. He looked exhausted, his face pale and eyes sunken. The staff, gathered behind him, wore similar expressions. Fear hollowed them out. "Show us the study," I said. Merrick led us through narrow halls where portraits of long-dead ancestors seemed to stare with disapproval. The air grew colder the deeper we walked. The professor's study was locked from the outside. Merrick fumbled with the key before pushing open the door. Traces of death lingered in the air, not the scent, but the silence. The room was orderly, almost too orderly. Not a single book out of place. Papers aligned. Ink bottle sealed. But at the center of the floor lay a faint circular smudge of black dust. I knelt. This wasn't spilled. Edwin shook his head. It wasn't here yesterday. I collected a pinch of the dust. It shimmered faintly as though reflecting a light source that wasn't in the room. The desk drawer was locked. "Where are the professor's private notes?" I asked. Edwin stiffened. "Gone." So the death wasn't simply mysterious, it was orchestrated. Footsteps creaked in the hall behind us. A maid stood trembling, her hands wringing her apron. "You should see the display room," she whispered. "The relic, it moved." That was impossible. And yet she led us down the corridor toward a glass case. Inside it should have rested a spearhead mounted on velvet. But the velvet was empty. The relic was gone. My heartbeat thudded like a warning drum. If someone took the relic after the professor died, they might have killed him for it. A house that keeps secrets is dangerous, but a house where secrets move on their own is deadly. The servants huddled at the far end of the hall, whispering among themselves as we stared at the empty display case. My mind churned with possibilities, none of them comforting. The case was locked, the maid insisted. I saw it with my own eyes last night. "And this morning?" I asked. "It was open, just open." Her voice quivered. "None of us touched it." Edwin looked to me for answers. I wish I'd had one. A locked case, a missing relic, a professor dead without a wound, and black dust where none should exist. Something connected these events, something intelligent. "Who had access to this room?" I asked. Merrick the butler cleared his throat. "Only myself and the professor." "And now?" I pressed. His eyes flickered guilt, fear. I couldn't be sure. "I haven't entered this room since the professor's passing," he said stiffly. "Nor has anyone else." A lie, it felt like one. I walked the perimeter of the room, inspecting the floorboards. Near the far wall, a faint scuff mark curved along the wood. A dragged object, something heavy. I knelt. Edwin hold the lantern. Light washed over the scuff. It disappeared beneath the wall panel. "Help me move this," I said. Together we pushed. The panel gave way with a soft click, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness beneath the estate. Edwin inhaled sharply. The professor mentioned old service tunnels sealed off. Apparently not sealed well enough. Cold air wafted from the passage, carrying a faint metallic scent, iron, dust, and something older. Footprints in the dirt, fresh ones. I lifted the lantern. The prints led downward. "Someone is using these tunnels," I murmured. Edwin swallowed. The hooded figure, before I could answer, a crash echoed through the manor above us, followed by a scream. Not fear, not surprise, pain. We ran. The scream came again, sharper, closer. When we reached the grand hall, a housemaid sat collapsed on the floor, clutching her arm, tears streaming. "What happened?" I knelt beside her. Her voice trembled like a frayed string. "A man, tall, hooded. He came from the shadows. He tried to grab me, but I pulled away. He ran toward the west wing." The west wing was where the professor kept his most sensitive research. The hooded figure wasn't wandering. He was searching. For what, or for whom? I rose, pulse quickening. "Edwin," I said, "we're not hunting a ghost." I looked toward the dark corridor ahead. "We're hunting someone who knows exactly what they want. Some shadows follow you, but some shadows wait for you to follow them." The west wing of Highridge Estate had always been kept shut, according to Edwin. The professor used it as a private archive, a place where he stored the relics and research he deemed too dangerous or too valuable for casual study. Now, as we stepped into the corridor leading toward it, the air felt heavier, almost suffocating, as if the house itself objected to our intrusion. The hooded intruder had escaped in this direction, but he hadn't fled blindly. He moved with purpose, familiarity, and unsettling confidence. Whoever he was, he knew these halls better than most of the staff. With every step, the wooden floor gave a soft groan, as though warning us to turn back. The shadows pressed inward. My lantern cast long, trembling streaks of light across the corridor. Edwin stayed close, clutching a small brass candlestick as though it might fend off something monstrous. Ahead, the corridor forked, left toward the archive rooms, right toward a small conservatory. "Which way?" Edwin whispered. The answer came in the form of a soft thump. Then another. Coming from the archives, we moved cautiously. The entrance to the archive was sealed by a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. But now, the lock hung twisted and broken, as though struck by considerable force. Inside, the archive room was in ruins. Cabinets overturned. Scrolls and maps scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. A pedestal at the back, where Professor Mycroft once displayed his most prized finds, was now bare, save for a cracked wooden mount. Someone had taken something from it. Recently. Edwin's face drained of color. This pedestal, it held the professor's field journal, the one from his last expedition. The same expedition where the professor acquired the obsidian spearhead, the missing relic, the missing journal, a dead professor, a hooded intruder, all threads of the same knot. I scanned the room, noting faint marks in the dust, boot tracks leading toward the far wall. But the wall itself was bare stone. No door, no latch, nothing unusual except a single unusual detail, A circular depression carved faintly into the stone, barely visible. Edwin frowned. "What is that?" "A seal," I murmured. "A hidden door." The professor must have built a concealed compartment into the wall, and someone knew how to access it. "Give me that candlestick," I said. Edwin handed it over. I tapped the wall, listening for changes in the reverberation. On the third tap, the sound dulled, hollow. I pressed the circular depression. With a soft, grinding noise, the stone shifted inward and slid aside. A hidden passage. The air leaking from it was cold enough to sting my lungs. We stepped inside. The narrow tunnel descended at a gentle slope, lit only by the faint glow of my lantern. The walls were lined with old shelves containing clay jars, torn scrolls, and fragments of carved idols. At the bottom of the passage, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. The air smelled of dust and old secrets. And something else, footprints, fresh, leading deeper into a secondary tunnel to the right. But it was the object in the center of the chamber that made my blood freeze. A journal lay open on a stone table. The handwriting inside was jagged, hurried. The ink smudged in places, as though written by a trembling hand. Edwin leaned close and whispered, "This is Professor Mycroft's handwriting." I examined the final line written on the page. The ink was still glossy. "If anyone reads this, know that the relic does not belong to us. It has a guardian, and the guardian is already here." A chill sliced through me. "Edwin," I said quietly, "we're not alone." At that moment, footsteps echoed faintly down the right tunnel, slow, deliberate, coming closer. There is a moment in every investigation when instinct whispers what logic cannot yet prove, and mine whispered that we were being hunted. The footsteps grew louder, measured, confident, and impossibly calm. They didn't belong to someone running or fleeing. They belonged to someone who knew we would come, someone who expected our arrival. Edwin pressed his back against the wall, panic rising in his eyes. "We should run," he whispered urgently. "No," I said softly. "Running in darkness gets people killed." I dimmed the lantern, allowing only a faint glow to spill across the floor. The chamber darkened, shadows stretching like searching fingers. Footsteps stopped just beyond the tunnel's bend. For a moment, only silence. Then a voice, low and steady, "You shouldn't have come down here." Edwin gasped. The voice was familiar to him, or perhaps simply unwelcome. I raised the lantern slightly. The figure stepped into the light. It was Merrick, the butler, but his expression was nothing like the composed, weary servant we'd met earlier. His eyes were cold, alert, almost predatory. Edwin stammered, "Merrick, what are you doing?" "How did you?" "What I've always done," Merrick answered calmly. "Protecting the professor's work, protecting the relic." He stepped further into the light, revealing a long object wrapped in cloth strapped across his back. A spear-sized object. My voice stayed level. "So you're the one who removed the relic from the case." He didn't deny it. "The professor believed the relic was cursed," Merrick said. "But he misunderstood. It is not cursed, it is sacred. And it was never meant to be taken from its resting place." Edwin's voice trembled. "You killed him." Merrick's jaw tightened. "No, I tried to stop him. He wouldn't listen. He grew paranoid, frantic. He was going to destroy the relic, to burn it, break it, anything to escape the visions." Visions, another dangerous word. "And the black dust?" I asked. "A sign," Merrick said quietly. "A warning." He ignored it. The tension in the air thickened like smoke. I took a careful step. "Where is the relic now?" "Safe." Merrick's fingers twitched toward the wrapped bundle. "Protected." He shifted his stance, blocking the tunnel behind him. Not a coincidence, a strategy. He didn't intend for us to leave. "Merrick," I said slowly, "the professor's death was not natural. Someone caused it." His face hardened. "Not someone, something." Edwin's voice cracked. "You expect us to believe a spirit killed him?" "A guardian," Merrick said. "Every relic has one. The professor woke it the moment he touched the spear." He pointed to the journal on the stone table. He wrote about the shadow he saw, the whispering voices. "You read his warning." I had, but I didn't believe in spirits. What I did believe in was men who used superstition to mask their crimes. I kept my voice calm. "Merrick, step aside." "No," he said simply. "I cannot let you interfere." He reached for the spear. Edwin exclaimed, "Wait," but it was too late. Merrick pulled the cloth away, revealing the obsidian spearhead mounted on a wooden shaft. Black, glossy, etched with symbols that seemed to move when the lantern light flickered. Edwin recoiled in horror. "Merrick, what have you done?" Merrick raised the spear, reverence and mania swirling in his eyes. "The guardian chose me," he whispered, "and now it will choose again." At that moment the ground beneath us trembled, just enough to shift the dust and send a shiver through the chamber walls. Something else was here, something breathing. When the earth itself shudders, it doesn't matter whether you believe in curses. Your instincts believe for you. The tremor rippled through the chamber, subtle but unmistakable. Dust drifted from the ceiling in faint clouds. The lantern wavered in my hand, its flame bending as though pushed by a breath that didn't belong to any of us. Edwin clutched my sleeve. "What was that?" Merrick didn't flinch. He gazed at the darkness behind us with a strange serenity, as if welcoming something unseen. "It's awake," he murmured. "The guardian knows the relic is here." Every rational thought in my mind screamed that this was impossible, that tremors came from tectonic shifts, collapsing tunnels, or structural decay. Not spirits, never spirits, yet the air felt wrong, thick, watching. I stepped between Edwin and Merrick, raising the lantern. "We're leaving, all three of us." Merrick shook his head. "You don't understand. The guardian won't let us leave until the relic is restored to its rightful place." "And where is that?" I asked. He pointed downward toward the deeper, darker tunnel from which the tremor had originated. "Below," he whispered. "The catacombs beneath Highridge. That is where the professor found it. That is where it must return." Edwin's voice cracked with disbelief. "The professor excavated those catacombs. He never said anything about a guardian." "He was afraid," Merrick replied. By the end, he could barely sleep. I heard him pacing the halls, muttering that something followed him from the expedition, something that lived in the shadowed corners. I tightened my grip on the lantern. "We're leaving this chamber now." Merrick raised the spear defensively. "If you try to stop me," I didn't let him finish, because the tremor came again, stronger. A deep, low rumble resonated through the stone floor, vibrating up my legs and into my ribs. The walls groaned as though straining under immense pressure. Edwin stumbled. "The tunnel is collapsing." But my instincts told me it wasn't collapse. It was footsteps, something heavy, something deliberate, coming from the tunnel behind us. Merrick stepped back, clutching the spearhead as though it were the only thing keeping him alive. "It's here," he whispered. "Do you feel it? The air moves around it." I did feel it. A faint shift of cold air brushing past, a presence without form, without sound, yet undeniably real in that moment. My mind raced. If the tunnel behind us collapsed, we'd be trapped. If something, anything, emerged from that darkness, we'd have no escape. I seized Edwin's arm. "Move." "But Merrick, move." I dragged him toward the hidden stairway leading up into the archive. Merrick didn't follow. "I must return it," he said, voice trembling with fervor. "Only then will it stop." He turned toward the deep tunnel, spear in hand. "Merrick," I shouted. He didn't look back. He walked into the darkness. Edwin gasped. "We can't leave him." Another tremor tore through the earth, so violent that the stone beneath our feet cracked. A slab of ceiling crashed down where Merrick had stood moments before. We barely leapt back in time. "Merrick," Edwin cried. No answer. Only silence. And then a whisper, soft, indecipherable, coming from the dark. I grabbed Edwin and pulled him up the steps. The tunnel screeched as more stone fractured. We burst into the archive, gasping for air. The room shook violently. Dust rained from the rafters. "We have to get out of the house," I said. "Now." Edwin nodded, trembling. As we fled into the corridor, a final thunderous collapse roared behind us, sealing the hidden chamber, the tunnel, and Merrick inside. But the whisper followed. When a whisper follows you out of the dark, it doesn't matter what you believe. It matters what believes in you. We stumbled out of the archive hallway as the last of the tremors faded beneath Highridge Estate. The house settled into an uneasy stillness. No more rumbling stone, no more shifting earth, just the suffocating quiet of a place that had been holding its breath for too long. Edwin leaned against the wall, drenched in sweat, gasping. "Merrick, he can't be gone." I steadied him. "If we stay here, we will be next." He nodded weakly, but his eyes flicked back toward the hidden chamber, hollow with shock. Merrick had been a man he trusted, perhaps even admired. Now that trust lay buried under tons of shattered stone. A soft creak echoed from deeper within the west wing. Edwin tensed. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," I murmured, hand tightening around the lantern. "We're not alone here." I expected another tremor, another collapse, another physical threat. But instead, a faint whisper drifted down the corridor. Not words, not breaths, something between them, like the echo of a voice speaking through layers of earth. Edwin backed away. It followed us up the tunnel. "No," I said calmly. "Sound travels strangely in old houses. The quake may have opened another passage. Nothing supernatural." But even as I said it, gooseflesh rose along my arms, because the whisper wasn't random. It grew clearer, closer. A slow, scraping sound began to drift across the floorboards, like something dragging itself across wood. "Back," I said quietly. "Stay behind me." Edwin obeyed, clutching the candlestick like a lifeline. The corridor ahead was dark except for the faint orange glow of sunset slipping through a cracked window. Shadows stretched long and restless across the walls, bending strangely as though pulled toward something unseen. Then, at the far end of the hall, a shape emerged. Tall, hunched, shrouded in the dimness. At first I thought it was Merrick, injured, disoriented, somehow alive. but the posture was wrong, the movements too fluid. The shape passed slowly beneath the window, and for a heartbeat light brushed its edges. It wasn't Merrick. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It wasn't wearing a hood. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in blackness too deep to be natural. Edwin's breath hitched. "Is that the guardian?" "There is no guardian," I whispered. Yet my words felt painfully thin. The figure raised an arm. Something dangled from its hand. Cloth, torn fabric, a piece of a uniform, Edwin's uniform. He staggered backward. "It was in my room. Run." We fled down the corridor. The lantern swung wildly, casting warped shadows that chased us through the halls. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, followed. We rounded a corner and burst into the grand hall. Servants shrieked at the sight of us, scattering. "What is it?" the maid from earlier cried. "No time," I snapped. "Out the front doors now." They ran. Edwin ran. I turned just long enough to see the shadowed figure step into the hall, still calm, still silent, the black relic glow dripping from its hand. "Keep going," I shouted. We cleared the entryway and stumbled onto the front steps as the last light of day died across the estate. Edwin nearly collapsed onto the gravel drive. Behind us, the front doors slammed shut, not from wind. From inside, Edwin whispered, "It trapped us out here." "No," I said, chest heaving, "it's trapping itself in." He looked at me terrified. "Why?" I stared back at the house, now dark, quiet, and impossibly still. "Because it's looking for something," I said softly, and I already feared what. You can run from danger, but you cannot run from unfinished stories. And Highridge Estate had a story it refused to stop telling. The air outside the manor tasted different, cold, sharp, strangely metallic. The servants huddled together beneath the stone archway, their eyes fixed on the house as though expecting it to exhale smoke or shadows. Edwin sank onto the gravel, trembling. "It wasn't human. You saw that." "I saw a figure," I replied carefully, "wrapped in shadow, possibly wearing something that distorted its shape, possibly injured, possibly—" "Don't do that," he snapped. "Don't rationalize it. Not after everything we saw underground." I crouched beside him. "Edwin, panic makes monsters out of shadows, and denial gets people killed." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they weren't entirely wrong. Before I could answer, a breathless voice called out from the driveway. "Edwin!" A woman ran toward us, skirts lifted from the mud. Her face was streaked with tears and sweat. Edwin's voice cracked. "Clara!" She threw herself into his arms, sobbing. "I came as soon as I heard about the professor. Oh, Edwin, the servant said there was screaming." "Clara," Edwin gasped, holding her tightly, "you shouldn't be here." She clung to him, oblivious to the fear that clung to the rest of us. I turned toward the house. Highridge loomed like a stone coffin against the bruised sky. One of the upper windows flickered faintly, just once, like a dying candle, then darkness. "We need distance," I said. "All of us." We regroup in the carriage house. The servants moved quickly. Fear has a way of making people obedient. As we crossed the courtyard, I felt something watching, not from the house, from the ground. The quakes earlier had left fissures across the cobblestones, thin cracks radiating from beneath the manor walls. Something shifted beneath the earth, as though the house was settling, or waking. The carriage house offered brief refuge, warm light, locked doors, the comforting smell of hay. But safety is an illusion, and illusions don't last. Clara sat beside Edwin, clasping his hand. "Tell me what happened." He hesitated. So I spoke for him. "The professor died under mysterious circumstances. His relic is missing. A man meant to protect it turned fanatic, and something followed us from the hidden tunnels." Clara shook her head. "This can't be real." "It is," Edwin whispered. "But what I don't understand is why the figure took a piece of my uniform. Why me?" I had a theory. I didn't want to say it. Clara looked at me. "What aren't you telling him?" I sighed. "The professor's journal, the last page, it said the Guardian chooses targets based on proximity to the relic." Edwin's face paled. "Meaning what?" "Meaning it thinks you touched it," I said softly. "Or that you're connected to whoever did." Clara covered her mouth. A loud crack sounded outside. Everyone froze. A second crack, sharp, deliberate, not thunder, not wind, something striking wood. Edwin whispered, "It found us." I rose slowly and extinguished the lantern, plunging the carriage house into shadow. Then in the silence, a slow, dragging sound scraped across the gravel, coming closer. When something hunts you by sound, breathing becomes a luxury, and silence becomes your only weapon. The scraping across the gravel drew nearer, steady, rhythmic, impossibly slow, as if the thing outside was savoring each inch it approached. The servants clung together, wide-eyed. Clara buried her face against Edwin's shoulder, trembling. I motioned for everyone to stay silent. The carriage house walls were thick timber, but the windows were thin, old glass, prone to cracks. Moonlight filtered weakly through them, painting ghostly streaks across the floor. Another scrape. Then a thud. Something heavy bumped the outer wall. Edwin's breath hitched. I pressed a finger to my lips. Silence. A shape passed by the nearest window, just a blur of movement barely perceptible. But the glass frosted where it paused, as though touched by something cold. Too cold. Clara whispered, "It's searching for Edwin, isn't it?" I didn't answer. The shape moved on, scraping again, circling the building, testing it, learning its edges. I whispered to Edwin, "Did you ever touch the relic?" He shook his head violently. "Never. I only carried the crate it was shipped in. I never saw it uncovered." The scraping stopped. The air grew so still that even the dust seemed to hold its breath. Then a soft tap on the door. Tap, tap, tap. Clara whimpered. A few servants began praying under their breath. Edwin clutched my sleeve. "What does it want?" "To open a door," I said. "Any door." I crept toward the main entrance, stepping lightly across the wooden floor. The lantern remained extinguished. Light would betray us. I peered through a crack between the boards. The yard was empty. No figure, no shadow, nothing. Then something moved directly beneath the window, pressed so close it had been hidden by the sill. The edge of its arm, or the shape of what resembled an arm, dragged upward, leaving a streak of black residue like ash. I leaned back quickly. It wasn't a guardian. It wasn't a spirit. It was a person wearing something coated in black dust. But not Merrick. The height was wrong. The movement was too subtle. There was someone else in the tunnels, someone alive, someone stalking the estate. I turned to Edwin. "This isn't supernatural. It's a person using superstition as cover." "But the tremors, caused by tunnels collapsing," I said, "and the whispers sound echoing from chambers. You heard it, you felt it, but none of it needs magic." Edwin swallowed. "So who's out there now?" Before I could answer, the scraping shifted from outside the wall to the roof above our heads. Clara screamed and Edwin covered her mouth, pulling her clothes. The servants ducked beneath the workbenches. Dust rained from the rafters. Something heavy crawled across the beams overhead. I whispered, "Under the wagons. Now." We crawled beneath the wooden wagon frames, hiding in the deep shadows between the wheels. The darkness swallowed us, turning the world into muted breaths and heartbeat thuds. The thing on the roof shifted again. Then it dropped, landed, right outside the main door. The impact shook dirt from the rafters. Edwin's fingers tightened around mine. The door latch rattled once. Then again, slow, testing. I whispered into the dark, "It won't stop, not tonight." Because the real horror wasn't that it had found us. It was the truth forming in my mind. The stalker wasn't seeking the relic. It was seeking vengeance. And Edwin Harrow was only the beginning. Some endings don't wait for sunrise. They claw their way into the night and demand to be faced. The door latch rattled again, harder this time. Once, twice, 3 times, each jolt sending vibrations through the wooden frame of the carriage house. Dust sifted from the rafters. The servants whimpered beneath the wagon benches, and Clara clung to Edwin as if holding him could anchor reality itself. Outside, something dragged its weight across the gravel, circling. The scrape of boots, or something shaped like boots, was unmistakable now, purposeful, heavy with intent. I steadied my breathing. Panic in a confined space is more lethal than whatever waits outside. Edwin whispered, "Why is it doing this? What does it want with me?" I looked at him in the dimness. "It isn't the relic. It isn't a guardian. It isn't a spirit. Someone is using fear the way a hunter uses darkness." Clara's voice cracked, barely audible. "But who?" I knew the answer the moment she asked the question. "Someone who knew the professor well," I said softly. "Someone who knew the tunnels, the archives, the relics legend, Merrick's routines, and Edwin's." Edwin blinked, confused. "Mine? Why mine?" I took a slow breath, heart pounding against my ribs. "Because you were the only witness who saw the professor the night before he died." He frowned. I wasn't the only one." "Yes," I whispered. "You were. Merrick suspected something followed the professor, but only you saw the professor's final state. And only you talked to him after he handled the relic." Edwin inhaled sharply. "But what does that have to do with the figure outside?" A voice cut through the night, a voice that froze every drop of blood in my body. "Edwin," Clara's fingers dug into his arm. "That voice. Edwin, who is that?" He shook his head violently. "No, it can't be." The figure stepped into the thin strip of moonlight visible through the window. Not a monster, not a shadow, a man. His hair matted with dust, his coat torn from crawling through tunnels, his eyes hollowed by obsession and sleepless nights. Colonel Elias Crane, a name the professor once trusted, a colleague who vanished months before the relic arrived, presumed dead during the last expedition, but very much alive. He spoke again, voice cracking like dry branches. "Edwin, you left me there." Edwin stumbled backward in shock. "Colonel, you were declared missing. We thought." "You didn't think," Crane snarled. "You ran. You abandoned the expedition when the tremors began. You left me trapped in that chamber while the professor dug out the relic." The pieces locked together like teeth of a finally turning gear. Crane wasn't a guardian. He was a survivor, one the professor left behind. Crane slammed his fist against the door. "Open it, Edwin." "No," I said coldly. "Step away." His voice sharpened. "You don't know what he did. The professor broke the seal. He awakened something deep in that chamber. He knew the cave was unstable. He knew I was still inside. But he wanted the relic more than he wanted my life." Each word was soaked in betrayal, raw and festering. Edwin shook his head, tears forming. But the professor tried to get you out." "Lie," Crane roared. He struck the door again, splintering the wood. The entire frame shuddered. Clara sobbed. A servant fainted. The others hid behind crates. Crane's voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "I waited, days, weeks, alone, with that thing whispering from the dark. I dragged myself out with broken ribs, only to learn the professor returned here untouched by guilt." He leaned close to the window. "And you, Edwin, you helped him." Edwin collapsed to his knees, shaking. "He blamed you," Crane hissed. "He said you were the one who urged him to keep the relic. He said you were eager for promotions, funding, status." "No," Edwin cried. He lied. He lied because he hated what he had done." Crane slammed his palm flat against the glass. A crack shot across it like lightning. "He died holding the spear. I wanted to kill him myself, but fate gave me the pleasure. And then I saw Merrick trying to bury the truth, so I followed him." My blood chilled. "You killed the professor," I said. "Yes," Crane growled. "And Merrick tried to hide the relic. I ran him into the tunnels, but the cave-in slowed me. He died for his delusions, and now," his voice softened to something far more terrifying, "I finish what the professor started." He looked directly at Edwin. "You die with him." Crane lifted a stone block, ripped from the garden wall, and hurled it at the window. Glass exploded inward. The servants screamed. I grabbed the nearest lantern stand and shoved Edwin aside as Crane forced his way through the shattered window. He lunged. I swung the lantern stand with everything I had. Crane staggered. Clara pulled Edwin up. We bolted for the back exit. Crane roared and gave chase, but the broken glass shredded his palms and slowed him. We burst outside into the icy night air. Crane stumbled into the doorway, bleeding, snarling like a wounded animal. "This isn't over," he shouted. "Edwin Harrow, your name dies with mine." But the weakened roof beam, damaged by the earlier quakes, finally gave out. The collapse dropped a cascade of timber onto Crane, pinning him to the floor. Dust billowed into the night. His voice choked off. Silence. Only then did Edwin collapse into Clara's arms, sobbing into her shoulder. Authorities arrived hours later. The tunnels beneath Highridge were deemed structurally unstable. Crane's body, discovered beneath the wreckage, was identified by his personal effects. The relic was sealed in a museum vault, placed under controlled study, not worshipped, not feared, just observed. Edwin left archaeology forever. Clara stayed by him through every nightmare the ordeal carved into his mind. As for me, I returned to my quiet flat above the apothecary. But on some nights when the city sleeps too soundly, I swear I hear faint scraping beneath the floorboards. Not supernatural, not a guardian, only a memory that refuses to stay buried.